Welcome to another episode of Who's Listening? The Owl Next Door. We have some special guests today. Let's watch.
Today with us we have Dr. Brian Mealey, who is our Executive Director and President at Project Perch. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We've been very blessed with your advice and guidance over the years. And to my left is Director of Burrowing Owl Conservation, Paul Kragh. We often refer to him as our boots on the ground, and also Owlman Paul. So I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you was where your love of raptors came, and when does the burrowing owl come into your life, and how does that work?
No, you go back to history now. I was working at the Miami Science Museum, and essentially they had, we started a wildlife program. And anytime you start a wildlife program, if people hear wildlife, they find an injured animal, they start bringing them in to the museum. So the first one that ever showed up was a screech owl. So the screech owl came in, we had no experience with the raptors, but we did contact someone who did, and he wanted us to give him the owl. And I said, no, we're going to keep it here and raise it. And then he goes, well, you don't know what you're doing. I said, well, we're asking you for advice. So he finally gave us some advice. And eventually transferred to another center where we prevented from being imprinted with us. And that's kind of where it all started. The raptors started coming in. And again, a lot of egos involved when you deal with raptors. So if a bald eagle shows up injured, everybody wants the bald eagle. So we just developed the Falcon Bachelor Bird of Prey Center. And so we concentrated on raptors, and that's basically where it all started. And then it took me into field research, which was really nice. The first research project with bald eagles, the national park approached us, asking if we could teach them how to handle bald eagles. And I asked, what are you doing? They said, well, we're going to go and collect blood. So being a biologist, I said, is there an opportunity that I might join you guys? And he goes, what do you want? I said, I'll take the blood also, and I can do what we call the serum chemistries of the bald eagle, which has not been documented. They're going to be doing DNA, so can we do it? He goes, oh, absolutely, and the other one's going to be looking at mercury. So I said, it kind of works perfectly for all of us. So after their project was done, we stayed out there working on the bald eagles. Then I decided to go back to my master's. And then the professor was asking me, okay, well, I was saying wood storks at that moment. He goes, they're not accessible. You have to drive 3 hours to get to them. So your master's, you want something close by. And he suggested burrowing owls, which I knew nothing about. So he goes, just go on our FIU campus, take a look out there. We have some burrowing owls, and see if you have an interest. So that's where it started. And I said, okay, let's make my master's. So as I started driving around Broward County, even Dade County, we spotted them in residential areas. And this had never been documented before. So we went in there, got a banding permit. I also worked with a gentleman called Brian Millsap, who was part of Fish and Wildlife Service, because he was doing some other work in Cape Coral with burrowing owls, showing me how to band them, mark them, and release them again. So that's where it started. And it was funny that when I did my master's, one of the things my professor said, whatever you do your master's on, it's going to stay with you for the rest of your life, probably. And here's 30 years later.
Whether you want it to or not.
So.
And describe your master's, your thesis a little bit, because you're comparing different populations of owls.
Yeah, we're basically actually at the reproductive ecology.
Yeah.
So we were actually just seeing what the whole process was for the burrowing owls. That's where we learned about the excavation. Okay, is it active or not active? So you'd be looking for prey items sitting on the edge. And then if they're going to be nesting, you start looking for decorations. So the first thing we started noticing was poop. And I was out in the cattle fields, and they would bring these big patties by their burrows. So the question was, why were they doing that? So if you're in residential areas, they'd be bringing dog poop to their edges. So we never knew if they were a deterrent for ants and that kind of stuff, or was it actually attracting a prey that they could actually eat? So we never really found out why. Hopefully maybe you have seen that and you could talk about it. So, but I was the interest. And then when we started developing, we started seeing other problems with them. Some places like some residential areas had red ants, which are an introduced species here. And they would be at the edge of the burrow, going down into the burrow, and we would find all their babies with legs bit. So, and that were just the red ants. So, but they survived and eventually fledged out. So that's kind of where it worked out. So I think the funnest part is working with the people out there, the residents, because you're asking permission to go on their property. The first thing is, are you going to take my owls away?
Right.
We're not going to take them. I'm going to put little bands on them so we can identify them. Will it hurt them? No, it will not hurt the owls. You can be there when I do it if you'd like to see it. And as part of the government, they give me a permanent license, and I have rules that I follow. So then you'll see the owls. You'll know if they're the same owls every year or not. So then we started getting into people to bond to their own owls. And they already were bonding because in a lot of residential areas, they would build little houses for them. So the owls can get into these little homes and sit there out of the sun, and it worked. So that was probably the best thing. But then we did other research, like in Miami International Airport, which is a little different. The wild population, no one messes with them, and they're just sitting out there. So we always were wondering about the aircraft and collisions with the aircraft. So part of the airport personnel saying they're dangerous to aircraft. And I said, that little owl going through that engine of that jet? I don't think so. So when we talked to pilots and all that, they said they don't bother us. They're fine. It's the bigger ones during the wintertime when the seagulls start showing up and they start hanging out in these open areas, they become, in their flocks, become more dangerous. But the owls, most people said they don't bother anybody. So that's kind of where I pursued everything.
Talk about, at some point you have burrowing owls as patients in rehab, and you end up having burrowing owls, and then talk about the hoot story.
Well, I think the difficulty is when you get the injuries with burrowing owls is you're going to have those that can't be released again and those that can be released. Usually if we thought they had a 50% chance, we'd give them that chance. And the reason we would do that is as long as they have some good flight, they are usually hanging around residences, and therefore people with their night lights on the outside attract bugs. So if this owl took residence within that home, he would have a source of food. And it kind of worked. Then if they can't be released, you would bring them into captivity and they become an ambassador species. And I think that's the important part is we look at burrowing owls as a species, threatened species here in the state of Florida. They're declining, so one day will they become endangered? And that's just one species of 1,000 that's happening around the world. And these are the things that, this group that you developed and are managing is working on one species, one at a time. And look how much work is involved in dealing with these one species. But you deal with 1,000 other ones that are having the same problem with no help. We're going to be losing a lot of species. And it's, habitat destruction, et cetera. So, we try with the burrowing owl, we're trying to look at the species, keep that species alive. They're a residential bird now. So basically living with people. And that's where, Paul, you've been involved in really heavy duty with under the sidewalks, I think, crawling underneath them. So it's people like yourself that are totally involved. I did that work, maybe 20 years ago. And therefore you guys took over and started doing very similar
I think
work.
it's interesting because I'm from up north, and so I relocate down to Florida. I used to tell this story a lot. I live right down the street from the Pompano Air Park. And so I had been a birder up north and I'd been a plover warden. And I would go up and jog around the Pompano Air Park, and I had never seen an owl that lived on the ground or that burrowed underground. So to me, it was just this kind of amazing thing. And I had my son, and I wasn't going to be working full time, so I was like, you know what, I'm going to go volunteer at a bird project. I'll go to Audubon, I'll see who's working on what, and I go to the South Florida Audubon Society, and my resume is shorebirds. So they're like, oh, you'll count, lease turns, and I'm like, but who's working with the little owls up at the airport? They seem so cool. I'll just do censuses of them or go where are the owl people? Well, there were no owl people right then. And when you looked in the literature, there was your paper, which studies the reproductive success and the ecology of the burrowing owl. And by then, Pam Bowen had done a statewide census, but really on the southeast side, it's just your paper. And so I'm like, I have to learn owls, right? And you were the expert at the time. So
Still am. No.
Still am. And I don't know if you remember this. I call you up and I finally am talking with you and I like, I really, can I volunteer for you? I'll just work for you on the burrowing owls. And you were like, well, you had your projects and you were busy. And so I was like, well, I'll start a project at the Audubon Society. And so that's kind of how Project Perch gets born. And then you come and consult on all the initial projects. I say, Brian, we're going to be here and we're trying to install these burrows. And I'd send you the plans and you'd look at them. And then you'd come out and we're installing, I know we're going to talk about the burrow design, but we're basing our burrow design off of some of your, and maybe you can talk about them, some of the projects you did putting in burrows for owls.
Yeah, I think we started with the companies that are building, contractors, and they all of a sudden have they have green vegetation, they bulldoze it all down, put nice white sand up in there, and the first thing that attracts is the owl. If they're in the area, they're going to come to that area. So next thing you know, they have a burrowing owl in the middle of the project. So then they would call Fish and Wildlife. They would say, well, you may want to contact, Brian Mealey to see if he can help you. So that's how it kind of evolved. But one of the big things, I remember walking onto these properties with these contractors, and they would be looking at me like really suspicious. I said, who is this guy? He's going to stop us from developing. And I said, my first statement to them, these are the easiest animals to work with in development. We just got to move them someplace where they have their home. So there's always within the construction, first of all, we have no place to move them. And I said, can I see the blueprints of what you're building? And so I could be looking out there, say, okay, what's going on out here? Well, we're going to be building, okay, what's going on out here? Oh, out here, nothing. So why can't we put a burrow out there? And we'll passively move it. Now, what do you mean by passively? Well, I'll build a little, like the jump frog step, put an artificial burrow in here, they'll jump here, I'll destroy the original one. And then from here, they leapfrog to the next one until we want them where they want to be. And then we let them be. So that's how kind of the rehab, and when I was moving them, that's kind of what I had to do. And we really tried to avoid having to move them from the site. I mean, if they picked that site, because that's where they wanted to be.
You tried to keep them on site.
Exactly, someplace in the area. So, yeah. And it was kind of, and I think the biggest lesson there is when the contractors, we're not trying to stop them from developing. We're just asking you to give us a little space for these owls. That's all I'm asking. And eventually, really, they had no resistance. They were very open to it. And when the word got out, and a lot of the contractors, I said, yeah, sir, I heard you help so-and-so. And I said, yeah, but well, you have to see what we got here. Because some of them, there was nothing I could do. We're going to have to destroy the burrow.
That's a very interesting point. When we do presentations today, we tell the groups that we're talking to, I ask if they know the difference between preservation and conservation. Mm-hmm. And when I first learned this, I was like, aha moment. Mm-hmm. Preservation is where you set aside a lot of land, there will be no development. Conservation is where you allow some development, but you also have burrows on the property where the owls still have their home, just not in the middle of that football field or in the middle of that construction site.
Yeah, we all dealt with football fields. And
there you go. Yes,
field owl.
Yeah, we always try to get, but even the football players, they're all very interested once you got working with them, and you get them involved with you. They would help build the burrows or to help us move them. So that's, I think the educational component is such an important factor because these are owls that live with you. They have joined our ecosystem of development. And by being with us, we have to learn to coexist. And we have to, if we can understand what their needs are, which are really minimal, hopefully they can be happy and survive. But right now, they're being pushed out of all habitat. A lot of the development nowadays is like 100% development of a property, leaving very little areas for these owls. And they're still out there, and they're still looking for a place. So they moved, I think, into residential areas if they're there. And now we have to teach the residents, The only problem we have with residents is landscaping. We always want to put what we call a perch out there so people know where they're out there. And then the problem there is the weeds grow and no one weeds them.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the burrow's covered up. They can't get back into the burrow and you just defeated the purpose. So we always try to teach them you have to be careful. You don't weed eat them when you know the owl's inside the burrow. Because if he pops out while you're weed eating, it can be pretty tragic. So you're trying to you flush the burrow out, or the owl out of there, then you weed eat, and then leave, and it'll come right back. So we taught a lot of people that, and it seemed to work.
We just recently were involved. They were putting underground utilities in a local municipality, and they found burrowing owl burrows with the owls along the sidewalks in the front yards. And I remember in the past you had mentioned that the burrowing owl is going to become the backyard bird, the next backyard bird. And now we've kind of stolen that and said they're going to be the next front yard bird, because all of these burrows are in the people's front yards. And the reason we think that happens is because owls like wide open spaces, and then they have more open space. They'll have this front yard, they'll have the neighbor's front yards, they'll have the street, they'll have across the street front yards. It's more wide open.
It's owl psychology.
Yes, exactly. But you're right on. They are becoming more residential because loss of habitat.
Oh yeah, and no one really knows where these populations came from in Florida. Cape Coral has a really big one out there out west. They think that a lot of ours came from that population, but there was a population at Kissimmee also, smaller population. So is there a blend that enabled them to move into the South Florida region? But I don't think we'll ever know. The genetic study that you mentioned, you may want to elaborate on that. They might be able to find that out.
Able to figure that out. I was going to ask you, I was told that they are a relic from when Florida was a desert.
Okay.
The burrowing owls and the Apuntia cactus. I think those two species are here that long. Does that sound right, or?
I don't know. If they have found fossils remains of these birds that show that they were during that time, but I have never heard that they have found fossils, so I don't know.
Maybe the genetic study will help figure out how the owls have moved around.
The DNA will document the history.
When Florida came out of the last ice age, 10,000 years ago, Florida was double the width.
Right.
So the central part of the state, the Lake Wales area, the Kissimmee area, was dry scrub land. They had a lot of rattlesnakes. We think maybe that's where the owl learned to mimic the rattlesnake sound. And it wasn't until the early 1900s when they started developing South Florida, they dug the canals, drained the Everglades, making land possible for the owls to live here, high, drier ground. And at the same time, the development that was going on in Central Florida was pushing the owls away. They were coming down further south. In the late 1800s, there was a report of owls at the Lake Wales Ridge colony of 200 burrowing owls in one large colony documented. Wow. It's just incredible the size. That's actually in Central Florida.
The Hollywood owl man, Chris Reese. We were somewhere with Ricardo, and Ricardo was explaining, Fish and Wildlife was explaining that the owls had opportunistically moved down and followed people, right, as they drained the Everglades and everything was dried out. And that, the owls weren't here before us, here before you. And Chris Reese and we were researching and saying, no, owls have been here a long time. And that's where we were able to find them in the Life Bentley histories at the Smithsonian. And they had all these reports of owls in the 1800s and on golf courses and doing different things back then. And he was like, see, they've been here all this time. So, but obviously with a changing landscape, right?
Well, I think to learn from that is how adaptable they are.
Very
Here they're adaptable to what we're doing. That's where we have to learn to coexist with them if they're going to survive. But if we're going to resist that, we have a problem. So we have, education is important. I mean, I think it's funny that, when I was teaching, and I'd always bring up the environment to the kids, very few learn things over the years. I'd be repeating the same story to a different group of students every single time. And I'm like, why don't they know this already? It's supposed to be in the science books. It's supposed to be in a teaching class. They don't know it, or they don't retain it. And to me, that's that lack of connection between the student or people and the environment they live in. Because you can ask anybody who lives, probably most residents, they know nothing about their backyard. They spray it, see a bug on it, let's kill it. And
there's a lot of
so
fear.
these are the ecological, educational programs that we have to develop for these residents without changing their way of life, because they don't want to have to go out and do things totally different, but try to get them to blend in. That's the only way I think the owls are going to survive. So
When we first started Project Perch, we were almost marketing it in the schools as kind of like this real life hoot.
Right.
And we specialized in field owls, and we would start out, putting artificial burrows on the edges of the school properties, but having the kids come out with us and having the kids help dig the burrows and have some environmental stewardship. And it was so funny. Sometimes you'd go into the schools and you'd ask, hey, does this school have owls? And everybody would be like, no, this school doesn't have owls. And then we'd go in and ask the kids, and the kids would be like, oh yeah, there's an owl. He lives out, on this side. But a lot of times they had never dug anything. They had never kind of like dug in the grass, or, you would see the girls were kind of afraid of bugs. And so it was kind of this hands-on thing that I think was kind of like outdoor classroom for the kids, and where they don't go on a lot of field trips, so they don't get to see things like that. This is something they could do at school and then watch those owls every day as they
yeah, that brings out one of my memories. Yeah, one of my memories is taking a group of inner city students out into the Everglades, Florida Bay, and with reporters. So we were actually looking at bald eagles out there. And I just remember the reporter coming up to me. They aren't saying anything. They're not talking. And I said, I'll ask. So I went to one of the students and I said, you guys, can you talk to the reporter for us and get them more involved? See, they go, we don't know what to say. We have never seen anything like this in our life. I said, you've never been out of the city? He goes, it's our first time. We've never seen this. This is like totally overwhelming, their sensory system. And it's like, they're in the middle of the bay. They're in the middle of the ocean, Florida Bay, with bald eagles. And they're seeing these chicks and bald eagles in nests. And they're like, wow. And so as the time went on, I sat them down. I said, look, what you're telling me is what you got to tell them. Tell them you've never been out here. You don't know what to say. And express that, because how many students like you are out in your school that don't have this experience that you're getting? And I said, it's important that you see this, because literally speaking, they could walk 1 mile east of where they live, and they would at least see the port of Miami, they would see water, and they haven't even been there. So that's something that amazed me, that you got to realize there's folks out there that have not seen the environment, and they'll never connect it unless we can try to connect it with them. So that's kind of a cool experience.
The owls are kind of this unique opportunity where they're living on school grounds.
Yeah.
So I think that's really different now. You have a state listed as threatened species that's trying to eke a living out on the edges of ball fields, or in the parking lots and things like that. So I mean, that's really different
I
for the
remember
kids.
you putting cameras up.
Yes.
And
yeah.
again, I'm not gonna, you can
Owl
elaborate.
cam.
Yeah,
Owl
they
cam.
had the owl cam, but what people have to realize with cameras, you're going to see everything.
Yeah.
You won't get away with it, and that's part of life. So I don't know if you want to express that.
Owl cam comes along with this really fortuitous events. It happens that Florida Fish and Wildlife regional biologist Ricardo Zambrano lives next door to James Curry, who moves in, and he wants to put in James Curry as aerial assassins and birding adventures with Nikon, and he's going to put up some cams. And so he goes to Ricardo and is interested in different Florida species that he could do this with. And Ricardo suggests Project Perch with burrowing owls at a school, because he felt that had such a educational side to it. And they were, when it came to having to film, they were good subjects. And so James comes along, and that's how we get the funding for OwlCam. And we set OwlCam up at one of our first mitigation projects. So we had already put in burrows for owls on the side of a middle school. And the owls were living in them. And we set up the camera, and it starts, and all sorts of problems with that, right? Not being able to capture the kids' faces, having the right view, having the owls show up to work every day. But I think it's truly where I learned the most about owls, because we would watch them basically as long as it was light out, and even in the dark, you could kind of see them communicating with each other. And so our owls are on camera every day. We watch the kids go by. We watch, sometimes the kids throw things over the fence, and we're going along, and the OwlCam, the first nest, we lose to a tropical storm. And so they have to re-nest. And we're, I think, 3 nesting attempts in, and they finally have 5 young. And it is like the most exciting thing. And viewership is rising. And we have young out there. And one memory that's really vivid is one of the owls is kind of lying down in the sand and wiggling around. And the biology teacher calls me and says, something wrong with the owl. Get online, start watching. And we're watching. And we're like, what's wrong? And so now I'm calling you, and I'm like, Dr. Mealey, look at the cam, what's wrong? And you're like, oh, that owl's fine. He's doing a dust bath, and there's probably ants. He's probably anting, and it'll be okay. He'll get back up. And then I used to joke sometimes it was a hawk cam at times. We would see the Cooper's hawk come in, and we were learning about species that are really residential in Florida. They don't migrate. They're here year-round. Of course, the burrowing owl is part of this, and the Cooper's hawk is becoming part of this. And we have this on camera with everybody watching. The coop comes in and has a successful take, and the coop grabs 2 young at once, but can only take 1. And so 1 owlet is left dead on camera. The biology teacher is running out. The kids are crying. It was so hard. And we didn't know at the time. The parents were having a tough time keeping the whole brood fed. So we would end up losing a 3rd owlet right after that due to starvation. And only 2 owlets survived. But I think that was a very tough time for me. And it had an educational Facebook page with it. And we were posting everywhere. And I thought I made a very reasonable comment and said, that coop has to eat. The coop has to eat too, and she could be a mother and she could have kids, and and then it was, and then there was pandemonium.
Just a bad hawk. Predation is the tough one.
But it was tough,
Yeah.
and the cam really taught us that, right? Mm-hmm. We would see that the persistence a coop has to have, and how quickly it would fly in, and it would reach in with its talons and try and get in there, and they just it's such a hard existence.
I guess it's important to understand that the Cooper's hawk is a bird hunter. Mm-hmm. They're designed to kill birds. Yes. So if you really look at their structure, they have very short wings, long tails like a rudder, so they could just maneuver chasing birds. And like you saw them going in, I saw them at the airport going literally into the burrows, going after these owls. And then they have to really have a hard time crawling back out. So, but it's a species that was not here as a resident. Then it started to nesting here. And I remember at the Museum of Science, my wife had called me, asked me that they had 2 young birds come in. And she sent me a picture of them. I was like, really hesitant at first at what they were, how to even look them up. And they're 2 baby Coopers. And so they were now nesting in Coral Gables. And they put them back into the nest. The fire department helped them out. And then we had another one with a gentleman, a little Cuban guy down at the end of the street with his chickens and all that. He had one nesting right above him. They wasn't attacking his chickens yet, so he was okay with it. But he had a young bird also that fell out of the nest, so he put it back up. So they were nesting here now. And so that becomes because there's so many non-native species birds here. You know, the collared doves, white-winged doves, starlings, and monk parakeets. And these animals have a new source of food.
Right.
So why move out?
Owl cam's also where we learn that camera's watching all the time, and owl cam is watching the mowers come in, and they open up the gates and the mowers will roll in. And we're using really one of your more original burrow designs where it's just the 3 to 4 foot length of pipe.
Right.
And we have the bottom cut out so the owl's talons are in the dirt. So we had been installing these, and there would be people live watching and making comments, and they'd see the guy on the mower it's kind of a tight space where Alcam was, so he'd come in and he'd drive forward and drive back and drive forward and drive this way and drive back, and then people would start typing like, okay, he's mowed it, it's an owl, like you need to move on. And in the beginning we felt like one of the advantages to the artificial burrow was that it could be mowed over.
Right.
You didn't have to kind of fence it off and keep the mowers away. And then eventually what we found is that you'd have a perch in there and they'd be going around in whatever pattern they had to make, and they were collapsing kind of right behind the tunnel. And so that's where we kind of all discuss and say, I think we had 3 collapses in a row.
Right.
And we were worried that they were maybe building their nesting chamber out in an all dirt, kind of behind that tunnel.
Right.
They would expand it the way they wanted, and then that kind of put their nesting chamber at more risk. And so Alcam kind of taught us that's where we make the valve control box modification.
Okay.
So,
Now remember, when you talked about the artificial burrows, one of the reasons we developed them, I remember at the airport when we had some drought situations where the burrows were there. What people don't realize, with all the weeds and everything, those weeds grow around the burrow, and they're like a structure holding the mine together.
Support,
And
yeah.
they keep it. But when those plants start dying because there's a drought, that's when we started seeing a lot of the sand collapse right into the burrows. And we probably lost a percentage out there not even knowing which ones collapsed. So that's one of the reasons we developed this artificial burrow, just to make sure there is no collapse on certain areas, because we have droughts every so often and plants die. And there is a sacrifice, so we understand that nature takes care of its own. There is going to be death, but we can help mitigate a little bit and see what we can do with it.
Now you do a couple of projects in the very beginning where you put burrows in at different locations, and I was always surprised. I think you felt like they were temporary, right?
Yeah.
You were building a temporary home for them to keep them on site, and then they would eventually move out and find their own sites and
Right.
make their way. But owls stay in your burrows for year after year after year, and by the time we end up going to when they're discussing uplisting the owl from species of special concern to state listed as threatened, we use your burrows as an example because they've been there by now for over a decade?
Yeah. They've been there a long time.
And they still had owls in
Yeah.
them. And we go and we survey some of your sites, like
Right.
Central Broward Regional Park, and the pipes are still there, and the owls are still there, and
Yeah.
the population is still doing well. So was it surprising to you that they would just
Not really, just
adopt them because of the adaptability?
Yeah, it's like, the Homestead Air Force Base got a call there once, and there was a burrowing owl that nested inside one of the jet engines. And I said, what? So I went down there, and the owl was in there with 2 eggs, and they never hatched out. They weren't viable, but these owls are very adaptable. And by watching over the years where we see them, where they're attempting to nest, they just need like a cavity to get in there. So we thought if we did the artificial burrows, like you said, they were to be temporary, because it gives them a chance. Now they have protection,
Right.
and they can have some place to run to if there's a danger. But then they can also start looking for their own burrows. But they have prime habitat, they have
Yeah.
prime real estate. Why move?
They like their condos, right?
They have sand, like a beach.
Yeah, so I think it changed along the way. We end up having a couple different slogans like plant a burrow, grow an owl, and safe burrows, save owls. So I think we really look at them as we're sinking that permanent home.
Yes.
We hope that it will last forever. So we're trying to make sure we've got spots that'll be protected either through parks or preserves. But we don't look at them as temporary anymore. So it's changed.
Now they're residents. So
And we don't let people run over them with the mowers anymore because of the collapses, but that brings another challenge with it because we're really roping and signing almost all burrows in urban Broward now. But if the vegetation isn't maintained.
One of the changes that we found when the burrow design, the depth of the burrow, the nest chamber. Lil, do you have a burrow that we can use? Thank you. This is the nest chamber. This is a 10-inch valve box. And then this is the 6-inch pipe that we use. So there's holes that's drilled right here. We zip tie these together. And we actually bury this 10-inch box, 6 inches of dirt on top. The owls come up ground level, they go down, and then when they get into this, we have actually cut the back out. So now they're continuing to tunnel. They'll turn this 40 inches and a valve box into a 10-foot long burrow. But the extra depth now when they tunnel out the back is it's 16 inches deep, which when we do have these drought periods and the roots don't bind the soil as much, because we have that extra depth of soil, it's less likely to collapse.
yeah,
That's
good,
something we've learned
yeah.
over time. We've had collapses right out the back where the owls dig out. So now when we do the install, we make sure we have a clean cut of soil. We put this right up
very
against
tight.
Yeah.
Install them,
undisturbed
so-
soil. And with the extra depth, we very rarely get collapses in the back.
Right.
I won't say never because it's going to happen.
Yep.
But we found this to be a lot better adaptation.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've had a lot of pushback and a lot of challenges, right, really, to the design. In the beginning, people always used to come to us and say, just use 4-inch pipe. Do you remember this? 4-inch pipe will be cheaper. 4-inch pipe will be cheaper. And you would always say, 6-inch pipe is closer to the, if you went out and actually measured the burrow, the 6-inch pipe is the closest. And if you only had, do you remember the story about the 4-inch pipe? With two things. It's cheaper to use corrugated pipe too.
Yeah,
So everybody would say,
yeah.
go ahead and use the corrugated pipe. Don't waste your money on the sewer pipe. And you would say, owls don't like to walk over
well,
plastic.
exactly.
It was a real thing, right? And an intact pipe can move water. So you needed their feet to be, their talons to be in the dirt. But that, a 4-inch pipe, if you had lots of young and they were trying to flush inside, trying to escape a Cooper's hawk, they might catch a wing on the edge of this unforgiving pipe.
Right.
And so a 6-inch pipe had enough room. And over the years, Paul's gotten very good at really filing down the edges and making sure everything is smooth. Because sometimes when you cut the pipe, you've got a bit of a cut. Yeah, a bit of a sharp edge. So they do a really good job of kind of filing all the edges and keeping them smooth.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, we sand everything down. We use a knife blade just to take off the edge. So our volunteers don't get bloody hands. And it's great for the owls
And it's
as
great
well.
for the owls, yeah.
And we found that the amount of the pipe we take off at the bottom, we used to do like a third of the pipe. Now we're doing maybe a quarter.
The reason we did that was just because we wanted them to feel the dirt, and they can still dig.
And they dig themselves.
And they
so
clean
it's
everything
not
out.
their thing.
Get with rain, it's going to bring in more sand, so they can get rid of that sand. So, just using owl psychology.
We actually give 2 explanations for the reason we do it now. That's the main one, but there's a secondary. We have these heavy rainstorms in South Florida, and sometimes these areas just turn into almost lakes, and the water that goes down, it's able to percolate into the soil before it gets to the nest box. So that's another reason.
But the other thing to remember is, depending, you have to, where you go out here with the soil, there's different types of soils. So going back to the story of owls and rain, I remember out in, I think it's Rolling Oaks, is they have clay as their primary substrate. So a lot of times they would dig a burrow and you think it's there, and all of a sudden when it floods, all the babies are sitting outside the burrow. And so when I would put my hand inside the burrow, it was only like maybe a foot long. So I could, when we knew that was going to happen, you can go in there and build an artificial burrow for them, but it's still going to flood.
Right.
So we don't want to, so basically what I was telling the residents, if you can, get a little kennel, scoop them up, put them in the kennel, and leave the door open. And so the owls, the parents know where they are, but as soon as that's done, they can go back into their burrow. But that's really not the best habitat for burrowing owls. So they're trying everything where where they can possibly reside, but clay, not a good place.
That's true.
Yeah.
So good.
That's true. Well, fortunately, South Florida, we have 2 seasons. We don't have the 4 seasons. We have the dry season, we have the rainy season. And the owls breed during the dry season.
Right.
So they have a lot of nature on their side. But occasionally we do get these heavy, heavy rainstorms during the dry season.
Yep.
Lil, would you like to take this back? Thank you
And I think,
very much.
the structures that you all have modified, I mean, it's, all for the bird. And, they're increasing their success rate. Their mortality probably has gone down.
We say we're trying to give them a conservation lift
Right.
with this burrow. If we can minimize flooding and we can minimize collapse, like you said, we're not going
Right.
to be able to solve it all, but hopefully to lift that reproductive success rate.
Yeah. We accept death. I mean, the owl's going to die if they're not in the best place. Sorry, guy. I mean, go find a better habitat. But if we can give them a little chance of, increasing their success rate, then I think we're doing the right thing.
And a big piece of it, we say all the time, it's not just the valve box and the pipe, but Paul's got to hunt for high, dry ground, really, and try and give them as much of a lift as we can.
But I think the other important to identify here is you got these burrowing owls that are threatened species. No one is helping them except your group. You have a small group of folks. What are they calling you now?
I'm the director of burrowing
Owl Conservation. But what's the nickname you have?
Owlman.
Owlman. Yeah, Owlman Paul. He's out there going underneath sidewalks, doing all kind of crazy stuff that he has to be concerned sometimes for his safety, making sure there's different people there that he might need help. But it's a small group of people that are really protecting this species. And it's a lot of effort, a lot of work. And so this is what it takes in conservation, is people getting involved. So here in South Florida, all the residents should be involved. If you have burrowing owls, learn about the burrowing owls. Call up Project Perch. They will talk to you about the burrowing owls. Get involved. That way you can keep the owls. The owls are going to be here for hopefully ever. And we're doing a success rate. And that's kind of what we want. And again, people don't know what the behind the scenes. And I'm sure this beautiful outfit you're wearing, it gets all black and dirty by the time you're done with crawling through the dirt. And I think we've all done that. And it's just, it's kind of crazy. And we have other species out here that are also doing the same thing. Barn owls are trying to nest where they can find cravities. We have a few gray horned owls. So there's just a lot of, South Florida is just a myriad of wildlife. And whatever we can do to help, I think it's really important.
Yeah, sometimes we're simplifying it. We're trying to explain, this is really just a bird box, but it has to go underground.
Right.
And then other times we're trying to make sure that design is the design that other people use, because if they don't understand the Florida environment, where the water table is, you don't want to install the wrong box, because then, you're not.
Yeah, I think out west they use a lot of wood sometimes at first. And that's the first thing I said, wood? And here in South Florida, it's going to rot with the rain.
We've had a lot of challenge over the years. I think sometimes people say, oh, well, it's a burrowing owl, so what works for the western owl should work for the Florida owl, but it doesn't adjust. And so we see very large nesting boxes. We see corrugated pipe, long runs of corrugated pipe, like 6 feet, 8 feet, into a sealed chamber, because they have different predators out there that they're trying to protect from. So our design is again tailored for this kind of Florida
And I think that's important to understand is every environment is going to have a different need. And
Right.
that's what we're involved in, is basically understanding South Florida. I mean, we
Right.
deal with hurricanes. We deal with all kind of structured things that destroy structures, and even how a burrow can be destroyed. So this is the things that we've adapted to, that we're learning, and we're applying it to a species. And hopefully that species will benefit from our experience. So I think that's very cool.
We've talked about this, but I was saying that I think when I started Project Perch, I used to always come up against this debate of what's the most important work. Like, well, there are owls that have been hit or need to get into rehab, or we need to get them back home safely, and there's an owl we can help save today. And then there's burrows that we need to install, and installing the burrows or giving them safe homes.
Right.
There's so many pieces of the work. There's trying to publish research. There's trying to advocate for owls that are in the way of construction. I think you may prioritize what would be most important a little bit differently, right? Which we've always talked about this, to
Right.
be able to publish more research for them
Right.
would
to me
be
is
great.
protecting the species and making the species benefit. One bird getting injured, going to a rehab center, it's one animal.
Right.
But you're dealing with wild populations out there, so you're dealing with the many, and you want to make sure those many are successful. So that's why, I mean, rehab is very important. I did it a big chunk of my life, but it's a one-on-one with an animal,
Right.
and the conservation is limited. But when you deal with an animal in the field, and you're actually watching this animal reproduce and not reproduce, and you can help that reproduction, that's going to be a lot more of a benefit to the species. But it's hard, I guess I think you mentioned it, it's just everybody has their different passions. So a rehabilitator has their passion of taking care of one animal. They will dedicate
One
their
owl
life.
at a
Yeah, they will
time.
dedicate
Yep.
their life to that. And I know rehabbers, and they're incredible folks. There's backyard people that just use their own home to rehab, to get them back out there. And I'm just going to plug one organization, which is the Florida Wildlife Rehabilitators Association, which is an organization, nonprofit, which basically is help coordinating a lot of the rehabbers. So if people are a backyard rehabber, they want to bring them into the group in order to teach them the proper methods, avoid imprinting of these birds, get them, make sure they're healthy, talk to rehabbers, other rehabbers. Because a lot of these people are scared. They just want to take care of their animal, and they're going to be everything's going to be taken away from them, and they can't get anything done. So they're a great benefit to all of them. So we dealt with, that's why we developed the FWRA, because to help communicate and create educational programs. And they have conferences every year, so if you want to go to a conference, they look at the website, you'll see where it's at.
Carl Hyacinth writes the book Hoot, which is which is, to me, I watched the movie Hoot. Of course, it was already around when I started working with burrowing owls. So one of the first things I could do was sit down and watch Hoot with my son. And it really is sometimes, I watch that and it's like, it is that simple, right? Kids helping owls and digging these burrows. But
Right.
talk about what it's like to be on the set of Hoot and helping with the owls and doing that.
Well, it all started with my wife knew Carl Hyacinth, and she also read the book and all that. And that's Greta Mealey, or Greta Parks Mealey. And essentially, when they started developing the movie, I can't remember if Carl approached her or not, if they had live burrowing owls that could actually be used in the movie. So the museum did have some permanently disabled birds that could not be released. A lot of them were educational birds, so they could be handled safely without disturbing the bird. So ended up being 3 of them, and they were all named after the director and the author of the book.
Jimmy.
And, so we had all the different, and Jimmy Buffett,
Jimmy,
who funded
Carl,
the
and
movie.
Will.
He funded the movie. And so basically they were perfect. And we had an animal trainer come in, and they teaching them how to respond to clicks. So they would get crickets, and they would get a click. So the owls, if they got a click, they would go into the burrow. So there's come film there, you see them run into the burrow because they got to click to go into the burrow. So there's a little training going on behind the scenes also with these owls. And no one has ever worked with these owls like that before if they were able to be trained. And they showed some adaptability that they were able to be trained. So then the care came in because they were a migratory bird species. So they're protected by federal and state law.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to use them in its capacity. So they extend, because the movie is so educational, and when they talked to me about it, this is exactly what you guys do, we do, is these owls are threatened. We were out there trying to protect them. We, because this was about a pancake house being built, and they're going to just destroy the burrow. And essentially, you move them. So this is a story we're doing every single day.
A real story, yeah.
And because of that, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service said you can use them.
It's okay to film them like that.
I thought it was pretty cool. So my wife was totally involved in that one. So they were their birds, and they did all the work and trained them all, and it was remarkable. And again, working with this group of movie stars and the director was quite amazing. These guys were very friendly, always asking about the owls. Luke Wilson is one of the actors of the movie. I remember my wife sat on his lap because the owl wouldn't look at him in the car. So she had to kind of bring the owl attention to say, look at me. And the owl did look, finally looked. So it's a lot of cool things that happened. So it's just quite amazing. So.
It's funny because Paul and I have done educational programs at Pioneer Middle School, which is where Hoot was filmed. And I can remember being there and having people say, oh, well, that was, all for Hollywood. That's all fake. And it was like, no, this school really has owls. It does have owls on its grounds. They're like, no, it doesn't. There's too many trees. There's too many. That's like, no, it actually does support owls.
And I think they put them on the film, some of these wild owls.
Yeah. So it's funny when people have but again, that's also the owl's adaptability, right?
Right.
So we do see owls in parks with trees and in higher densities
absolutely.
in urban areas.
Yeah.
So it's funny, but everybody's like, oh, that Hoot, that's all fake. Like that.
You're going to always get that. No matter burrows, you're going to get people like, oh, I don't like those burrows, or, movie, it's all fake. And no, it isn't. It's based on real life.
These kids grow up with owls at their school.
Yeah. I mean, here my son was an extra. He just got married, and this is like, 20 years ago?
Yeah.
And first thing he mentions, he was an extra on the movie Hoot. As he's sitting up there talking about himself, I was like, wow, he remembers that. So
Fresh with greatness came early.
So that's, to me, it was an important thing that happened to them being in that shoot. So, it was just a lot of fun. I mean, we had, like I said, we were treated with royalty because we were the bird people.
Bird people.
And again, there was the Miami Science Museum with my wife as director of the program, where Fish and Wildlife allowing us to use the owls for educational purposes like that made the whole story a truth.
I like to tell people that's how Brie Larson got her start.
Oh, Brie, yeah. Yeah. And she won an Academy. Yeah, with Brie and Mullifingers. They did, and the Logan Lerman. Yeah, he was in a couple of movies. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't even remember us, but they all held the owls. We have pictures of them holding the owls on their fists, and it was pretty cool.
We have this amazing biologist at Fort Lauderdale, FLL International Airport, and Dr. Schneider is at the South Florida Wildlife Center, and we're having burrowing owls come in from the airport. And the airport had a construction project. They were building a new runway. They resodded that whole new runway, and that pushed their burrowing owl population, which had dwindled over the years. They didn't have as large a population. And that population gets pushed to the other runway where they start being hit by the planes. And so I'm naively thinking, I've been all along trying to get mitigation habitat right there near the airport, but those days maybe are behind us a bit by then. And so we're trying to come up with a plan to translocate the owls, which I guess at the time, the owls were still a species of special concern, and that worked in our favor because they weren't quite as protected. And so we kind of start on this mercy mission, right, to move the remaining FLL owls, as they were known at the time. There were about 16 to 20 owls, and we want to move them out to a preserve. Lucky for us, the town of Davie has West Ridge Preserve, and so we have habitat available to move them. We have an airport biologist that's very interested in moving them, and we have South Florida Wildlife Center, who was part of the Humane Society at the time, saying this is the right thing to do. And so at the time, in the beginning, sometimes you start projects and you think they're going to be easy, and then you start writing I don't know if you remember this, translocation protocols that are 50, 75, 100 pages long. And we're in the midst of this fight about band color, our burrow design, using a different sized box. We should put transmitters on them. And we're really trying to do this rescue mission, and we don't have deep pockets. Everybody's donating everything, and we come along and we start to do this. And I think Paul volunteers to be one of the people to help the owls in the field during this.
I became involved. My wife and I had helped to sink some of the artificial burrows that were used in the translocation. When the birds were trapped at the airport, they spent a month at the South Florida Wildlife Center, a month minimum, because the owls have site fidelity. Right. If we'd have just brought the owls, they would have all flown right back to the airport. So they spent a minimum of 4 weeks at the South Florida Wildlife Center, where Dr. Snyder drew blood, determined their sexes. And when we brought them to West Ridge, they spent 2 weeks in a 10-foot pelican cage with 2 artificial burrows in them. Well, there was a male and a female. We had 6 cages with male and female. And then we had 1 cage which had 3 juveniles. As luck would have it, another owl shows up at the airport. So we brought in an 8th cage, and we moved 1 juvenile over into the cage with the new owl. These owls needed to be fed dawn and dusk because they can't hunt yet. They're still in the cages. So the volunteers all wanted to feed them at sundown. Nobody wanted to go out at sunrise. I had just retired. I said, are you kidding me? I get to go in this cage and feed these owls, mealy bugs and crickets. So that's when I first got the itch, and I began to go in. And we had a 3rd burrow outside of each cage. We call that the Houdini burrow.
Yeah.
And that was Houdini was a famous escape artist.
Right,
If an owl were to get out, somehow someone goes in to feed them and they get out, and they wanted to get back to a safe place, they couldn't get back into the cage. Well, there's a burrow right outside of the cage. Mm-hmm. The first day after we put the owls in the cages, we came back the next morning, there was an owl in the Houdini burrow. And I thought, oh no.
We've lost an owl.
Some owl got out of the cage, and we went through and all the owls were accounted for. A local owl had heard these airport owls calling all night long and came over to check it out and moved right into this artificial burrow that was outside the cage.
I started thinking, they're nice people.
It was great.
Give me a new home.
It was great. So we have an owl here. This is P14 on the band. He was one of the owls that came over from the airport. He was the longest living owl. He lived to be about 8 years old, which is a long time for a burrowing owl. And he passed away, natural causes. I found him right outside the burrow, which is a little unusual because generally the birds will pass away down in the nest chamber. Right. But I would check on these owls each night, and he would hear my truck coming, and he'd come out and greet me every night. One night he didn't, I was a little concerned, and the next night I found him. So now we were able to get a taxidermy to help us out, and we can use P14 for educational purposes. And so the Burrowing Owl Translocation Project will never die. It's here.
Yeah.
The owls that are at the site now, it's been 10 years ago. December 2015 is when the trapping took place. and they were moved to West Ridge Open Space Preserve in January 2016.
Okay.
And now it's 2026. We've got 10 years past.
Wow.
And the owls that are living outside today, we have a dozen owls there, 4 pairs and 4 singles. They're the offspring of the airport owls and local owls that had moved in. Very successful project, Kelly, and they told us it was not going to work.
I know, right? And we kept you very busy that year because you were consulting with us on band colors and protecting our burrow design.
Right.
And you helped Dr. Schneider when the owls were in care, what to feed them and how to, how to take care of them. I remember those calls. And coming out to the site, we tried to keep the owls configured the way they came in from the airport. And you added safety burrows in between the different clusters of burrows so that they would have a better chance of evading predation, because again, you're bringing them to a new site.
I remember you did trap them as pairs and brought them in as a pairs. We did not separate the pairs. So we tried to keep them together when they came in, which was important. I was going to ask you a question. When the kids see these taxidermy owls, do they react to them at all, positive or negative?
They love them.
They're so confused.
Okay.
Is it real? Yes, it's real. Is it live? Not anymore. We try to explain to them, they go, well, how do they do that? I said, I'm not a taxidermist, Google it.
Yeah.
When we first wanted to get, I'm a huge believer in all this stuff, being able to touch the talons and hold the talons and do all of this. And we originally wanted animals for education. And we were in meetings and stuff, and everybody was like, it's not humane to use, taxidermied specimens. We're like, but that's what all museums have, right? So they're like, get a carved burrowing owl. So Grant Campbell was out getting quotes for a realistic carved burrowing owl, which at the time was not economically feasible.
Right.
It was just thousands of dollars. And I can remember the vet at the time at South Florida Wildlife Center was saying, we lose owls and it's not very dignified and it's not very pretty, but his body's just going to get thrown out. So this would be much more dignified and to have the kids see them. And then we had one owl, Howdy, which I don't know if you remember this, when the Humane Society comes in, the South Florida Wildlife Center isn't really allowed to keep taxidermied specimens anymore. So there was a burrowing owl there. And so I had to go to the parking lot of a gun shop and go get the owl. And because they didn't want to throw it out, because they were like, to throw it out doesn't make any sense either. And we wanted one. And so we ended up getting it, but then you have the problem of how to get it onto onto a collecting permit, how to get it admitted somewhere that you didn't get it illegally. So Howdy ended up was a shared educational animal. Sawgrass Nature Center had Howdy, and then we got our own scientific collecting, and we were able to do these too.
They're good, they're great.
To me, this seems so easy, right? It seems
absolutely.
like they can touch something real, but not bother a real owl, right? You know what I mean? A live owl.
Right.
We have plexiglass cases that we set the owls in when we're like at an Earth Day function. We have tables set up so that the kids can look at them closely without actually touching the birds. When we're doing a talk and we have an audience in front of us, we always have Lil, who is one of our volunteers, our secretary, and she'll walk around with the owl in her hand so that everybody can get a really close-up look. And we instruct the people, please don't touch the birds, but get as close a look as you want. Go, is this real? Well, it's all real except maybe the eyes. The eyes are kind of fake, but the rest of it, those feathers and the talons, that's all real. And the kids are just fascinated with it. People protect what they love and what they know. If they don't know and understand something, they're not going to care about it. So we try to get them just as close and almost hands-on as we can.
Totally agree.
I think when you go to releases, you often see kids want to touch the bird, right? Like,
everywhere.
can I just touch it? Can I touch it? So it's like, here's something you can touch without, to release the bird without anybody touching it. But I always see that desire. They just want to have a tactile, that touch to it.
Yeah, we had a bald eagle that the only one that could handle it would be my wife's. And we were just dealing with that guy. Can I touch that? I said, you don't want to touch that eagle. She goes, why not? So I put my glove on.
Yeah.
You get real close, and that's why.
There you go, exactly.
And they go, does that hurt? Yeah. But luckily I have a glove on.
Even with these little birds, these little owls, when we do releases, we try to get the birds, the rehab birds that are ready to go back home, we like to put them into an empty burrow.
Right.
And I put on gloves that have steel fibers because these little things, they will make you bleed. They're small, but they will make you bleed. They'll bite and they will make you bleed. So
Put it many times.
I bet. One of the things that we talk about when we do the educational programs, whether it's tabling or we talk about how the owls are endangered, but these owls specifically are permitted. Kelly has permits from U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Florida Fish and Wildlife, and we actually have the permits with us on site.
Okay,
and
good.
we explain that the permit is required because people are not allowed to go out and hunt these owls for trophies.
Right.
That will cost you a lot of money and possible jail time. So that this is something that they won't see anywhere else.
Yeah, people, you just brought back a memory. I remember a guy bringing in to South Miami a blue and gold macaw that was still alive. And then I looked at it and I said, where'd you find him? Then he goes, well, he was in my backyard. Like, he was just sitting there. So I pulled the guy out. I said, what did you do? And he looked at me and goes, I shot it. Can you take care of it and bring it back so we can keep it as a pet?
Oh, no.
And I said, your bird's going to die. You shot him. He's not going to make it. And he goes, what? But can't you save him? I said, we don't deal with these kind of birds. We deal with native species. It's not a native species. If you want to take it to a vet right now, you can spend $10,000. No, I can't afford it. So he left it with us. It died.
Wow.
But when you go back to the stories, even the little owls like these, if they want to keep them as a pet, people have no understanding what a bullet will do to these species, even if it's a little pellet. I mean, it's just devastating what it does to a body.
I'm out surveying Central. You and I actually talked on the phone that day, but I went out to survey Central Broward Regional Park, which is one of your projects. And I was searching for owls, and I was just doing an owl survey. And this beautiful red fox was kind of floating around, and I was watching the fox, but I was busy owling. And the fox just seemed really beautiful, and the fox was kind of still following me. And then there were kids that were over in this complex, and they were kind of throwing things at the fox. And now I'm like, I called Grant first and said, I'm just owling out here, and there's this beautiful red fox, but I'm nervous because these kids are chasing it, and I don't know. And it didn't have rabies. There was nothing wrong with it. Now we have a little bit of a crowd. Now I called Dr. Schneider at South Florida Wildlife Center, and I said, I'm so sorry. I'm out at Broward Regional. There's this fox. I think we might need to trap it. I don't know. It's kind of following me. It doesn't. Things don't seem right. And she said, you're not going to believe this. There's a missing red fox right from next door, from the apartments right back there. There's a fox that was reported missing. So I was like, oh. So we wait. Now they send a trapper out, and the trapper sets the trap, and they put bananas in it. And I'm like, bananas? A fox's dog. So now Grant shows up, and he has chicken in he was gonna make chicken for the boys for dinner, but he had taken his defrosted chicken, and he's standing there, and he's like, the banana isn't gonna work. And I had dog food on the bottom of the car because I'd driven down with the dog. And so we're like, we get the mat with the empty dog food, and he's got the chicken, and the fox comes right up, and he almost goes to hand the fox the chicken, and everybody's yelling at him because they don't want him to get bit. So I puts the chicken in, we trap the fox. I put the fox in my Mini Cooper. I drive him over to South Florida Wildlife Center. This is going to be so amazing. I'm going to reunite this fox and everything's going to be great. And the family that owned the fox came in the next day and said, "That's not my fox." And so I guess the state said, "Well, would you like to take the fox because you have a permit for a fox?" And they said, "Well, you can't, that's not our fox." It'd be like, taking a strange dog.
right.
We have kids, And I felt terrible, but I was like, I learned that you could have a fox. It's cheaper to get a fox than it was to adopt a dog. And that had never even occurred to me. And so that was somebody else's fox. And of course, if they had it illegally, they wouldn't report it lost. I couldn't believe it. So now South Florida Wildlife Center needed to make a cage for a fox and find a home, and it eventually gets a home down at Zoo Miami. So she made it somewhere good, but I was just like, all I was out here to do was owl.
What you see here in South Florida is quite amazing. I mean, wildlife that, a lot of people say, "I'm going to go to Africa to see animals." I said, "They're here.
They're
Just-
right
just
here.
kind of drive around. You might see, you won't see elephants or anything, but you'll see monkeys that are running around, and they're all here. I mean, it's amazing how many animals escape from people, and you can buy these animals legally, and people don't take care of them properly. So it's quite a, I always find that interesting.
Yeah.
Every so often, we end up at a location with Florida Fish and Wildlife law enforcement officers. They'll have a call out, somebody's broken the law. And I was at one site, we actually were permitting for this company. It was doing construction work, and someone had taken their front end loader right over the ropes, knocked down the sign, right over the burrow. And I had the call, and I met the law enforcement officer out there. And I went to introduce myself to this officer. He goes, "I know who you are." I go, "Yeah?" He goes, "You taught my daughter about the owls at the Plantation Earth Day event." I was like, "Okay." And I kind of remember having a conversation with him. And so he says, "Yeah, we're definitely going to do some paperwork on this one." And when law enforcement says that means they're reading Miranda rights and giving court dates. And I let that officer know, he had a training officer with him to use us as a tool in their toolbox. The Florida Fish and Wildlife law enforcement, they know a lot about marine animals, they know a lot about pythons now, but not many of them have actually worked with Florida burrowing owls. So the word is getting out there with a lot of their law enforcement officers. If they get a call about the owls, they reach out to us right away.
Good.
And we're able to help them along.
We had a case where they were called to a school because there was rattlesnake in the burrows where the kids were playing, and they got called out and they started digging the burrows out, and lo and behold, there's an owl, right? And so the officer said, "Come out here, you have to rebuild their burrows." And they felt terrible. And he was like, "We just assumed they knew it was a snake down there," right? So they were just, and they just felt so terrible. So they got plywood and we reconstructed the whole thing. And then both those officers would stop back, and the owls were fine. They had their burrows back and they were fine. But I just remember those officers feeling, do you know what I mean? So bad. And they were like, we don't have a scope with us. We can't, it never even dawned on them. So we've had some funny ones.
Yeah, I had one that when I first started doing this, we were doing a breeding program with wood storks. So we were waiting for some babies that would fall out of a nest because they could never get back up there. That the Audubon Society, or the Corkscrew Swamp, we got 3 of them. And I remember traveling back to the museum, I got stopped by Fish and Wildlife. Yeah, she looked into the kennel and she goes, "Okay, what is that?" I said, "It's a wood stork." And she goes, "Okay." And then she started walking away. And I said, "You should be asking me for permits." She goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "This is an endangered species." I said, "You should be asking me for permits. So you don't know the bird, right?" And she goes, "No." I said, "Okay, well, this is the wood stork. It's an endangered species. Here's my permits." And highly protected. And they said, where'd you get it? So I told the whole story. But I said at the end, I identified them as a lot of these officers, they're law enforcement without the knowledge of what a species or certain species are. So yeah, I contacted them and said, look, if you guys want some talks or anything, but they never got back to me. So
You always taught me years ago, we would be on calls and stuff, and you would always say, in Broward, don't mess with an owl because someone is going to see you.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody loves owls, so
Yeah.
someone's always going to call. And last night we were out on the genetic study, and we were trying to two-way trap a recessive-eyed owl. And we were at Tefford Park. Lots of people go through there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had talked with a couple of people, but we were kind of like, it's coming. And then there comes the FWC truck in.
yeah.
Two different people called the state, two different FWC officers responded.
Wow.
But I always think about that because it's like most of the time they do get caught by a good Samaritan.
Yeah.
Someone will be calling in saying, hey, they're developing over there without a permit, or I see them bothering the owl.
I don't know how many
So-
times I got spooked by the residents, even though they knew I was allowed there, but they didn't recognize me. What are you doing on my property?
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, it's me. Oh, okay. So it's
We were good. We had the permit number on the actual trap.
nice.
And then online now you can show that
Right.
you're an agent in the thing. And then I hand my card over to the officer, and she says, Owlman Paul. And I said, yes. So
you
she
get
took my
recognition,
card,
good.
and yeah.
excellent.
The law
But they
enforcement,
responded
those
very
brothers.
fast. So
Yeah, I'm surprised. I mean,
we've
it's hard to
worked
get 'em out
together
there.
with them a lot when you think about it.
At least a few times a year, I'll get a call from a law enforcement officer. It says, well, we have this new sites, and there's a burrow. And I said, who's the landowner? I ask them to help me a little bit so we don't have to
Right.
check the tax rolls and find out and contact. If they contact the landowner,
Right.
then we're happy to go out and give a perch and a sign and rope off that little
Right.
tunnel so it's weed whacking only inside the ropes. And now they know. Many of them know
That's
to
the
reach
important
out
part.
to us.
Well, the recognition is I don't have to do it. So let's call the owl folks.
Hey, we're a tool.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
a tool in your toolbox.
And they like it. They love it.
And that makes their job easier. So
because they don't have a lot of time to do
that's
these
great.
things, and they're chasing other things.
Okay, I wanted to circle back around. One thing you had mentioned earlier about the airports and the owls. This past year, we were at Perry Airport,
Okay.
and Matt Natali, who we mentioned, the biologist from the Fort
biologist.
Lauderdale Airport, asked me if I could go out and remove burrows that were along the taxi areas.
Registered agent. Yep.
They needed a registered agent to do the work. They had the permit
Right.
in place, but they just needed a registered agent. And we had recently put in artificial burrows in the property right next door.
Okay.
So the owls would have a home
Right.
that I knew about. So I said, yeah, Matt, we're happy to go help you. And when I got there, we had to follow him around, and he's on the radio with the tower, and we have to make sure that there's no planes coming by as we're crossing. And he explained to me that if a plane is taxiing and say an iguana or something got in the way and he had to veer off the path, if there was a burrow, that wheel would hit that hole and it would be devastating.
Tip the plane.
It would tip the plane would flip over, so there's no way that these burrows could stay. That made sense to me. I said, okay, so I hate to make owls homeless, but they did have these new burrows we sank
right.
recently, so I was able to help him out and make the runways a little more safe for the pilots.
He taught me too that, in today's environment at the airports, sometimes it's not anything that's lethal or tragic, or they take off and they hit something, and they might hit something very small, like a kestrel or a burrowing owl,
Right.
and the plane would still have to turn around, land, have a safety check, delay everything, and of course that costs a lot of money. Right? And so there's an FAA rule, I can't remember when it went into effect, but you're not allowed to do anything to attract avian species within that perimeter road
right.
anymore unless you were grandfathered. So that allowed like San Jose that had that really amazing owl mitigation right there.
Right.
They're still doing it and it works, but a lot of other airports really can't do it anymore, which is a shame because
Yeah, but they're scared. I mean, that aircraft gets hit by the right bird, it's going down.
it's going down, yeah.
And that's a lot of deaths. So, yeah, I can't, it's, when they take off, I think just recently, Canadian geese get caught up in some of the aircraft. And,
Yeah.
But luckily they were able to land, and it's just crazy.
We measure success different ways on the translocation, and coming into the translocation, moving the airport birds to Westridge, the airport had an owl hit roughly every 4 to 6 weeks, and they had about 16 or 18 hits, burrowing owl hits, in their strike record. Wow. And after the project, we brought owls out 2 more times, but whenever we would meet with the airport, everybody would say, oh, the project wasn't successful. You had iguanas, you had this, you had that. And Matt would always say, but the strike rate now is 0. And so he would say, from an airport perspective, it was incredibly effective project.
Yep.
You saved those owls, and their biological output is now out there. We got a little bit of genetic mixing.
Right.
But I think, you measure it different ways. And we were always told that if we moved those owls out and created that vacuum, that immediately owls would move, new owls would just take over that habitat. And you and I were both saying, you would say, but what if there aren't enough owls?
Right.
If the owl numbers are dropping and owls are territorial, then there won't be owls to fill
the spots,
that gap.
Yeah.
And now 10 years later, we can say, that's in fact true. They're not pulling owls out of there. They've pulled out just a couple over the years.
Yeah.
And now they get them quickly, move them into the care center. I think they have like 1 pair,
Okay.
which is, I don't know, crazy.
Wow.
Incredibly successful over the decade since that project. I've lost count of how many babies, how many owlets have been born there and just fledged. We're helping the numbers stabilize.
And we still have owls at Westridge now. We're still carrying a population that's almost similar in size to what the airport had. So I think that part's pretty amazing.
That's a good point. We moved
Right.
16 originally, 15, and then we brought the 16
3
in.
juvies.
And right now we have 12.
12.
And we had 12 last year, and we had 12 the year before.
Okay.
So the biggest problem there now is the iguanas, because the iguanas bury their eggs. They breed the same time as the owls. So the iguana will go right down the owl burrow, and she'll lay 60 eggs right next to the owl eggs, and she fills in the hole. Luckily, mama owl will have a second brood after the iguanas are done. And we still have owlets born that year.
Okay.
But we're in the process of trying to remove the iguanas. That's a case where you remove them, more iguanas come. It's like the pythons in the Everglades.
Exactly.
There will never be an end to that. It's just an ongoing thing.
Yeah, especially iguanas, they can
We have to
drop a
come
lot
up
of
with-
eggs.
I have to come up with a solution, right? I have to come up with a solution.
Written
know what.
documentation said iguanas laid up to 40 eggs. We pulled 60 eggs out of one owl burrow.
Wow.
We counted them, laid them out, 6 by 10, 60 eggs.
Yeah, that's a problem. I mean,
Yeah,
it's-
and they can lay twice a year, the iguanas can.
I think, that's the problem we're confronting is all these non-native species. They come in here, there's no predation, there's nothing restricting them. I think the iguana's only thing restriction is the winter. That can't kill them if it got cold enough, but they always seem to come back because it doesn't keep consistent cold.
And in the beginning, I remember there was a push to try and get the stomach contents of iguanas to, we had to prove that there were owl feathers in there or owl
Okay.
parts in there. Were they actually, eating burrowing owls? And you were eloquently saying, but we were saying, it doesn't really matter if the iguana goes in and takes the owl's burrow over and evicts them. That's the end of it. And Grant was trying to help with the stomach content analysis, and they did have feathers they sent up, but I guess they've been lost. But Grant shot an iguana and brought it into the care center because they were the ones that were dissecting them and getting the stomach contents out. And then now Grant's like, I don't know, I'm getting in trouble over here because he brought an iguana, you know what I mean, that had been put down and brought it in.
Right.
And so he was like, I don't know, this stomach content thing's gonna have to figure it out. But yeah, I don't know. We haven't yet documented, but I don't think anybody's analyzing their stomach contents anymore.
It's become a moot point.
Yeah,
They're preventing the owls from breeding, and owls have a short lifespan. So in a decade, it's feasible that all we'll have is iguanas, and we won't have burrowing owls. We reached out to Kelly Gestring, who is the FWC's lead invasive person. He does all species except for the python. They have a python specialist because of the Everglades situation. And his office is nearby in the city of Sunrise. So he didn't know that iguanas were filling in owl burrows.
Wow.
I had him meet me at Westridge, and he was happy to come out, and he was just stunned. He's actually had some of his biologists go out and remove iguanas. They can't be relocated. They need to be humanely euthanized because they are an invasive species. But we would give Kelly Gestring owl locations that had problems with iguanas, and he would help trap and shoot with air rifles to remove the iguanas. So they've made an effort. They just don't have the resources.
Yeah, it's a consistent effort of going after them.
It's a big effort, right? Yeah.
It's incredible. I mean, it's just...
And maybe, again, a lack of research or knowledge about what is the true impact that the iguana is having on the natural Florida environment.
With their owl eggs, you know they're...
Because it's the...
Yeah, but you said they have a second clutch once the iguanas are done. So,
the owls,
So that'd be good documentation how often they show a second clutch after the iguanas lay eggs.
We have a couple of sites where, Grant was working on those in the beginning and putting the iguana traps out, but like you'd lose the nesting burrow and then they'd move right there, and then you'd have to keep trapping the iguanas. There's no end to the iguanas, and so.
So you go out there and shoot them, but unfortunately, I think most lay people can't discharge a firearm in a public place like that.
It's such bad PR to schools and everything.
That's why Fish and Wildlife has to do it, or USDA will do it too, Department of Agriculture.
Black powder bullets aren't allowed in the municipalities, but most municipalities allow air rifles.
Oh, okay.
And that's what's used to, and the animal needs to be humanely euthanized. So to do that now, you need to instantly destroy the brain.
Yeah.
So it needs to be a headshot.
Which is not easy.
We can trap live, and then we check with it, every 24 hours. If I'm trapping iguanas where there's owls, I'll set the trap in the morning, a live trap, and then I go just before dark because I don't want to catch raccoons or any night creatures. If there's an iguana in the trap, then I humanely euthanize it. If not, I just close the trap and check the next day. So that's one way that we can help remove one of the problems that the
But again,
owls
it
are
comes back
facing.
to a small group of people. Now you're trying to manage an exotic species, which is almost impossible. I mean, so something has to be done statewide, and with the state or federal government to get more involved in these non-native species, because, and I don't even know if they can control them, because they would have to shoot them, and
we would like to see some of the money from the Florida's Imperiled Species Permitting Conservation Fund spent, instead of buying properties and for putting in owl burrows, artificial burrows, to make habitat for maybe a dozen owls. Why don't they spend, how much money was it? $900,000?
At least, that's an outdated
that they had for the burrowing owls. That could remove a lot of iguanas. There are companies around, iguana removal companies, that can go out and and help the owls if they only had some money to do it with.
But a lot of time, I guess, what I've understood with FWC, you got to get into the commission. Find someone who knows the commissioners. Those are the ones you want to go after and talk to
They
them.
weren't counting invasive species removal as a form of mitigation, but we're like, if that's their single biggest problem on that property,
Right.
and the developer is willing to do it, and it costs quite a bit of money, that should be accepted, just like
Yeah,
mowing
but-
the grass would be, or
But the
or something
commissioners
else.
they set the rules. So you can be talking to everybody underneath, oh no, this is our money, whatever. But if you go to commissioners, start convincing them of what's going on, and that's again, political, you might be more successful because they can tell the staff this is where the money's going to go.
We were talking about the genetic study.
Mm-hmm.
The genetic study was trying to get funding from the Imperiled
Yeah.
Species Fund, and of course that is one of the mandates in the species management plan, but no money was available.
Yeah.
So here we are, Project Perch, trying to fund genetic testing for
Right.
the owls, which if we didn't fund them, they wouldn't get into the study. And so, that to me is kind of, it's great that we can do it, but I just feel like that money should already be available
Yeah, because they have their
somewhere.
unfortunately, they have their own needs for the money. It could be personal. It could be, I want to do a research project, therefore I'm going to use some of the imperiled money.
Right.
But again, going to the commission, convincing them that's what we need money for, why the importance is what's happening. And you might get, but it takes a while to really kind of work those commissioners.
I thought it was interesting. We were on the phone with Matt Dunning, who's the grad student that's doing the genetic study.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying to date he has 478 samples, and it's considered the second largest study of an avian species. And of course, Susan Davis asked, well, what's the largest data set? So we kind of all sat there. So I don't know if you have any ideas
No.
what the largest data set was. It was obvious to me afterwards, Darwin's finches.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned it. Yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, that makes sense. But yeah, and so they're able to retest old genetic samples if they're
Right.
available and gather new ones.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think that's pretty important work too.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And I'm hoping where that,
It might give
if
it-
that's published, do we think that, say it comes out that the Florida owl is genetically depressed, and that study should verify that, then can you turn around and say, hey, they really should be listed as endangered, not threatened?
Yeah, but who does that?
Right.
It's up to them. I mean,
And does that, I don't know, in the beginning I thought, I was so excited for them for their status to change, but I feel like it was much easier for us to help them when they were just a species of special concern.
oh, yeah.
If we had a field owl, you could go in that day and say, I'm going to put some artificial burrows over
Right.
here, and we're going to start attracting him off the field. It allowed for translocation, and then once they got uplisted, now
Whole different program.
it's a whole different,
Yeah.
and it makes it harder on landowners and harder to help them. So I don't know.
What do we do?
I've changed my whole thinking about
Yeah.
that sometimes. Do you know what I mean?
And it became endangered. Whoa, forget it. You won't be able to do anything with them. But yeah, I think your study would have to show a decline in owls, number one, in your whatever you are, because of iguanas or a decline, period. We published that paper, so it's been peer reviewed, which gives it a lot more strength, and then use that as your source.
Right.
And that's what they look for. They want peer reviewed articles or research that may delineate why we're doing what we're doing.
Right. And I remember when FAU's basketball team made it into the Final Four, and they did a National Geographic article on the burrowing owl, and the reporter did a very good job, called around, checked all their facts, and they reported all these owls that were still at FAU, and that the population of owls at FAU was growing and doing well, and that the estimates from the state for the burrowing owl was 10,000
At FAU?
statewide.
Oh, statewide,
No,
okay.
10,000
That's okay.
statewide. And I think it was maybe like 30 owls out at FAU. And so immediately Audubon, Everglades started calling and sending people down there and staring at the preserve, which was really an iguana preserve. There were iguanas everywhere. And the rest of us were left thinking, 10,000 owls in the state of Florida. And so last year, most of the owl groups reported, even the ones out west, we talked with Rich Walker, but we all had a bad owl year. We didn't, owls nested late, we didn't have as many young, we just felt like they had a tough year. And then we saw Cape Coral come out with the best census of owls ever. They estimated their population at 7,000. So, I don't know. I wondered if the 10,000 number is the number at which they would be delisted and no longer be considered state listed as threatened if we had more than 10,000. And so is there a need to get to that number
I guess that'd be the question.
to unprotect them?
How do they determine that?
Yeah.
And that would be a nice question to ask, because that'd be something written someplace.
Yeah, because
they base it.
The state has to eliminate species of special concern.
Right.
And so the owl only gets state listed as threatened because there's not enough information to
Right.
tell what is going on with it. And so it can't be delisted. It has to be further protected because that category got eliminated. So I was always told, don't say it's not necessarily because their numbers are declining. It's just we don't know. A lack of information.
And that's when, you have to be concerned of what rating is going to be there, because if it's endangered, no one's going to be able to work on the owl. I mean, very hard to work on them.
Yes.
Get permission.
Yeah.
And we were working with the eagles, and they were a threatened species. So we had to go through the federal government first. And because they issued their permit, and Bird Banding Lab issued their permit, then Fish and Wildlife Local, FWC, they issued the permit. But they were waiting for what the feds were going to do. And so so they gave us the permit. And then I think they're endangered, but then they delisted them to threatened. But now they're off the threatened list. So
Yeah.
the eagles are pretty healthy now. So I'd say I saved them, see.
Nice job.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know. I try and keep numbers quiet anymore. Yeah, I don't know. As an accountant, when you start things, when I started this, I immediately wanted to come in and count. But now I feel like, owls have good years, owls have bad years. The numbers are moving all over the state. So if it's not something that's kind of statewide and is able to capture everything, I might be doing well in Broward while they're doing terrible in 2 or 3 other counties. And so if I'm Cape Coral and I'm reporting, wow, the owls are doing really great, that doesn't say how they're doing everywhere else.
Right.
So I don't know.
But they're looking at numbers. So today,
Yeah.
10,000 would be a healthy population.
They no longer
yeah.
need protection.
Yeah. So.
So I don't know. And to me, in the beginning, I thought, if we get to 500 burrows, we used to talk about this all the time. How many burrows is enough? Will it be 500? Will it be 1,000? I feel like that's naive now that I understand the iguana.
Right.
And if I have 1,000 burrows out there, if 500 of them have iguanas in them,
A few years back, we stopped sinking one burrow. We put in a pair now. And we put in a pair because when the female starts to lay, the male digs a satellite burrow that we call the man cave.
Right.
And we want to control where that location is, not have it be out on a soccer field. So we put in 2. As time goes on, we see one is a nest burrow, and the other is an iguana burrow. And we had many locations where the iguanas are breeding here and the owls are breeding there, and they're like side by side.
So the male doesn't go to the burrow anymore. It's 6. Okay.
Yeah,
And you won't-
unless we can get rid of that iguana, and that's
you won't dig a new one?
sometimes
Okay.
not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're dealing with definitely a species that's interfering with the burrowing owl. So.
Yeah. If it's during the breeding season, then most likely the male owl would dig another one. But a lot of times, iguanas just like to cool off.
Yeah.
It's too hot during the summer, so they'll just go right down the owl burrow The male doesn't need the satellite burrow that time of year, so he's in the nest burrow with the female.
Right.
But you know, that works for sometimes, but when it's time for breeding to come around, that iguana has to go.
Yeah, that's our problem we're dealing with, is how do you control these non-native species? If there's no funding for it. So you can actually shoot them out there if it's legal, because they're not protected, but no one does it. We can't do it, but there's no groups out there that are going to do it. So it's almost like a reward system. For every iguana brought in, someone gets $5, or that's what they do with the pythons now in the glades.
Another interesting thing up in Clewiston, Steve Page is the farmer that has the owls on his land, and he's always saying, nobody's supporting me, supporting them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's the other side of it too, right? If you're out there being an environmental steward and you're really helping the owls, there's no benefit or protection or safe harbor to you for that.
You're doing a great job. Thank you so much. Okay.
That's our volunteers.
No incentive to get rid of the iguanas. It's crazy.
We do have a couple of iguana removal companies that have helped us.
Okay.
One still to this day, if we call them up.
If they're in close proximity with an owl, we can call and say, go help, and
they'll donate their time, their efforts.
Yeah.
But there's just too many locations, and they're not able to do that.
So what do they go to residences to get rid of iguanas, or
or
what's their business?
sites? We have different sites like churches and the casino and places that have had to get rid of them.
Yeah, it's one location. It's a huge project. It's a 10-year development project. There's going to be residential, shopping district, entertainment, warehousing district.
Right.
And this project was covered with iguanas. And there was owls that were living around an infield pond. And we relocated those owls. Originally, that development company had hired an environmental consulting firm who pulled the permit to just make these owls homeless.
Right.
Go in and remove the burrows. And they got a lot of negative publicity on that. So we went to the commission meeting in that municipality and spoke to the commissioner who was over that area, and we got the contact information for that developer. And we reached out to them and explained what we did, and they were thrilled. They had no idea that there was an option to put in artificial burrows and give the owls an on-site home. And like you said, we looked at plans, and we found what's going on over here? Well, on the south end of the property is now 8 pairs of artificial burrows.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay.
There's always a place if they just look at it and help the owls out. They don't need much. I mean, they're pretty easy. So
the iguanas have been just a major concern, and to this day, they're still pushing owls out of burrows, and the company that volunteers to help us, they actually did a contract with this developer, and they're getting payment as part of the mitigation and the permit to remove the iguanas. And they've removed just, I don't know, they've got to be over 1,000 now by now.
Well, and one of the things we were talking about is that with this recent cold spell, they were saying they had euthanized Chris said about 5,000 iguanas during this cold spell, and there's all this TV and all this press about it. And he said, and now everybody thinks, oh, I don't need to keep removing the iguanas. We're good now.
Yeah.
And so now he has people, and he's like, that's not actually good PR, because if you look at his numbers over the years, it's insane, like 22,000 iguanas he's trapped over these years. And so if you get 5,000, that's not even a drop in the bucket. You know, he's like, they've gone underground, they're up in the trees. For those 5,000 there's still 25,000 out there.
So what do you do?
Yeah.
What do you do? So
one day at a time.
One day at a time.
One burrow at a time.
I just want to say how lucky we were to have you here today. It was so much fun to swap owl stories and talk about all the things we never get a chance to talk about in the field. Paul, thank you so much for being here today. We spend a lot of time out in the field together, so it's great to be indoors and kind of just sharing ideas and talking. And thank you so much for joining us on Who's Listening? The Owl Next Door.
Thanks for watching another episode of Who's Listening? The Owl Next Door. See you next time.